Today on BRStv, we're talking reef parameters and testing. Hey guys, my name is Ryan. Welcome to another week of the BRS 160, where every week we do our best to help you guys, members of the reefing community, enjoy your tanks and find new ways to explore the hobby. We do that by following the setup and progression of this 160-gallon reef tank. This week we're going to talk about what to test for, frequency, and the kit or method we like best for each. I think there's more or less 3 groups of testing: critical to life support, important but requires infrequent testing, and nice to know. The items I include as critical to life support in a reef tank are salinity, temperature, calcium, alkalinity, and I think pH just squeaks in. Alkalinity is probably the single most important element to monitor, even more so than calcium. This is because there's relatively little alkalinity in the water and it gets consumed quickly. To get a better picture of this, imagine that you have 100 red marbles representing alkalinity and 400 blue calcium marbles. If we remove 80 of each, there's only 20 alkalinity marbles remaining, but you still have 320 calcium marbles. So while there's the same amount removed from the solution, proportionally, the alkalinity levels drop much further. If you only have time to measure one, calcium or alkalinity, on a frequent basis, it should absolutely be alkalinity. We recommend new reefers test alkalinity every few days in the beginning until you get a general idea of how your tank consumes alkalinity. After that, we suggest checking alkalinity once a week to ensure it's always on track. Weekly alkalinity checks will help keep you in tune with the tank until the tank finds stability. At the bare minimum, you should really be testing at least monthly. There are a few ways to measure alkalinity, but the most common two are DKH and milliequivalents per liter. DKH is probably the most widely used and what we commonly refer to. The goal for each range is 7 to 10 DKH or 2.5 to 4 milliequivalents per liter. You'll be able to maintain a healthy reef tank anywhere in that range. 7 DKH is commonly referred to as typical ocean values and what many reefers attempt to maintain. There's also been some studies that show corals can calcify and grow faster at higher alkalinities, so many reefers shoot for 10. My personal suggestion is to split that gap and aim for 8.5, which will make it harder for you to fall below 7 or overshoot 10. There are a lot of alkalinity test kits, but I think the best are likely the Red Sea, Salifert, Lamont, and something a bit different with the Hana Checker, which has a digital readout and the fastest of the bunch. I personally trust all of them to the degree that I need to for the reef tank. All the test kits are known as titration-based kits, where you drop small amounts of acid into the test sample until a pH-sensitive dye changes color. Since I'll give you readings accurate enough for our purposes, it's just an evaluation of price versus ease of use and quality of components. We're going to give a quick rundown of the process with each kit so you can get an idea of the differences. So the Salifert is one of the lowest cost reliable options for alkalinity test kits, and because of that, probably the most popular option out there. The test steps are pretty simple. All you need to do is add your test sample to the vial, a couple drops of the pH indicating dye, and then slowly drip the acid in until it changes to a pink or orange-red color, whichever one comes first. Once it does change color, hold it with the tip facing up and read the top of the piston to get your value. Check it against the table on the instructions to get the DKH of your tank. Note that we performed the test with a white background. It's a lot easier to see the color change with a white background, so you can do this against a white wall or really anything else that's white. The Red Sea Alkalinity Test Kit does come at a higher price point, but does have some sales points that you may find valuable, starting with the fact that it comes in a hard shell case. Since we're always dealing with water here, this might be more valuable than you think. The method they use also has the pH indicating dye mixed in with the titration solution, and it comes with a titrator, which makes it a little bit easier to perform the test. One last note is the water resistant instructions show the start and end point colors, which makes performing the test and reading the results easier. First step is to add your tank sample to the sample jar, then draw 1 milliliter of reagent into the syringe, place the syringe into the titrator, and screw the sample jar onto the bottom. So probably the coolest part about this test kit is I can now drop in the reagent and mix it with one hand. So the same thing as the last kit we performed. We're going to drop in the reagent and mix it until we see the end color. Reading the results of the Red Sea test kit's a bit different than the last one we performed. In this case, rather than reading where the plunger's at, we're going to calculate the amount of titration fluid that was used and then reference the chart on the back of the instructions to calculate the DKH of our tank. All in all, the Red Sea test kit was easy to perform, comes with some high quality components, and the additional price is probably justifiable to many reefers. The Lamont Alkalinity Test Kit also comes at a bit higher price point, but I think operates more like a lab grade quality kit than a hobby grade kit, and comes with some distinct advantages with the reagents, and I think the easiest to read endpoint, which absolutely results in increased accuracy. Performing this test is somewhat similar to the others. Put your sample from the tank into the sample jar, drop in your pH indicating dye tablet, and swirl it until it dissolves. Then insert your syringe in the reagent bottle and draw out the required amount. Then drip in your reagent and swirl until you get to the endpoint color. One really big difference with the Lamont test kit is how accurate the color points are in the reference chart. They look very, very close to the before titration aqua blue, purple endpoint, and even better, it has a past endpoint color of red. None of the other brands of test kits I've used are this easy to read, which I think is a really important component of accuracy. Reading the test kit's results is a bit different because it is aimed more of at a lab environment than an aquarium, and so it reads in calcium carbonate equivalents by reading the amount of reagent used. You can convert it into DKH with some simple math. End of the day, all three of these test kits are producing the accuracy and reliability that we require for most reef tanks, so the lowest cost option with the Salifer is probably going to be the most popular with reefers. However, if achieving increased accuracy and super easy to read results are the most important things to you, the Lamont is hands down the best option. One thing to note about the Lamont and Red Sea test kits is while the overall cost of the initial test kit is higher, they offer reagent refill kits, which makes the overall cost of ownership much lower. The last tool we're going to talk about today for measuring alkalinity is the Hana Checker. It uses a completely different method than titration with the test kits that we just referenced for measuring alkalinity. And there's a little bit of debate between which one is more accurate, but the Hana Checker takes the human eye out of the equation, which is a notoriously inaccurate measurement tool. So I think it's possible that the Hana Checker is probably more accurate than most hobby grade test kits. Performing an alkalinity test with the Hana Checker is absolutely the easiest and quickest test that we'll do today. You start by filling up both of the cuvettes to the 10 milliliter line with sample water from the tank. Turn on the checker, place one of the cuvettes inside the checker and press the button. This is going to be the 0 or reference sample for the test. Then draw 1 milliliter of reagent and add it to the other cuvette. Invert it 5 times to mix it. Place it into the checker, press the button once more, and in seconds you'll have your alkalinity reading in a digital format. The digital readout is obviously really easy to read and completely takes the eye out of the equation, so it's a really satisfying test to perform. This model actually reads in calcium carbonate equivalents, which is not something most reefers are familiar with, so you can just multiply the result that you get by 0.056 to get your DKH. Hana is on the verge of releasing a model that reads in DKH for us hobbyists, so you should see that pretty soon. I think this is one of the easiest ways to measure alkalinity in our hobby. Frankly, that means you're more likely to do it, which in my mind makes it worth it. If you're going to test frequently because you're newer to the hobby or own advanced equipment like a calcium reactor, the checker's probably a good investment. Testing for calcium comes in right behind alkalinity. Because there's more of it in the tank, proportionally calcium doesn't drop as much on a daily basis. Most reefers are shooting for 420 parts per million. I suggest testing weekly as you tune in your calcium solution, but you could likely get away with monthly after, just to make sure there's no big changes in calcium consumption from growth or new corals added to the tank. The two most popular calcium test kits are the Red Sea and Salifer. Lamont does make one and there is a Hana Checker as well, but they require dilutions for the test, so they're less popular. Dilution means you need to take a sample from the tank and dilute it in some RODI water to perform the test. If you really like the digital readout, the Checker might be worth it, but I'd say the Red Sea and Salifer are more common. Salifer's been around forever. It's one of the most trusted options, and it's also one of the most affordable, reliable options, probably why it's the most common calcium test kit in our industry. Performing this test is pretty simple. Just add your sample water to the vial, then 1 level scoopful of the dry powder. Don't mix it yet. Then add 8 drops of the liquid reagent and swirl for 10 seconds. Now fill the syringe with 1 milliliter from the last reagent bottle and slowly drip it into the test vial. The test is complete when it switches from a pink-red to a clear blue color. Again, to determine the results, hold the syringe with the tip up and look at where the black piston stops, then refer to the calcium table on your instructions. So the Salifer test kit was pretty easy to do. The color change is distinct, which makes it easy to read, and it's also one of the most affordable options out there, so it's easy to see why it's probably one of the most popular calcium test kits on the market. The Red Sea calcium test kit does cost a few bucks more, but it does come with a few benefits, like the hard shell waterproof case, titrator, and some pretty easy to read instructions. These procedures should seem pretty familiar by now. We're going to add our sample to the sample vial, 5 drops of the liquid reagent, swirl for 10 seconds, add 1 scoop of the powder reagent and swirl for 20. Then draw 1 milliliter with the syringe of the titration reagent, slide the syringe into the titrator, and screw on the sample vial. Slowly drip in the reagent and swirl until it changes from red to blue. Again, on the Red Sea test kits, we're not looking for where the plunger stopped, but how much of the reagent was used. Once you know that number, refer to the table on the instructions to find out the calcium level of your tank. So again, the color change on the Red Sea test kit was distinct, really easy to see. The titrator is nice, and the long-term cost of ownership is pretty affordable once you consider the low cost of the reagent refills. Temperature is one of those reef parameters that many reefers don't spend a lot of time thinking about or testing for, but it's one of those life support critical parameters. There's a pretty huge range that reefers keep their tanks in, but the lion's share of us are between 78 and 80 degrees, and where I suggest you shoot for. One of the things people take for granted is their heater or controller is accurate out of the box, which almost none of them are. I've found several controllers be off by as much as 6 degrees, which is in a pretty stressful range for fishing corals in either direction. So not only do we believe confirming the performance of your heater and calibrating your controller are pretty critical steps, but we also suggest confirming performance quarterly as well. Sadly, almost all the thermometers are also off by plus or minus 2 degrees as well. Rather than spending a fortune on something with tight accuracy controls, your best bet is just take 2 readings using different thermometers, or even better 3 and averaging the results. We have a whole slew of them in the $10 to $20 range. I generally prefer to use a mix of technologies like the armored Lamont thermometer and one of the digital options. If you have a kitchen thermometer around, that will work fine. However, if you like to keep your reefing tools and your food utensils separate, we also have some handy options from OXO. Salinity is a measurement of dissolved salts in the water. While you can be slightly outside of this, most reefers are shooting for 35 parts per thousand or a 1.026 specific gravity. For the most part, you only need to test for salinity when you're mixing fresh salt water. The one thing many reefers don't consider is the amount of salt dissolved in the water not only impacts salinity, but also basically every parameter. It's the salt that contains all your calcium, alkalinity, and other elements, so if you don't mix in enough salt, expect all of these parameters to be too low. Red Sea salt actually gives levels for various salinities at 30, 33, and 35 parts per thousand, so mixing it accurately is important. If you use 2-part, I'd check the salinity of the tank monthly. 2-part additives are basically dissolved salt, so they will increase the salinity. If you're a 2-part user, it's a good idea to keep an eye on the salinity. Most normal water change schedules will keep salinity in balance, but it's a good idea to check it monthly. If you don't use an auto top-off, you might want to check the salinity before you replace the top-off water as well, so you can get an idea of the effect evaporation has on the tank. As the water evaporates, the tank salinity increases. When you pour in a bucket of fresh water, it decreases. These swings are not only affecting the salinity, but basically every parameter in the tank. This is one of the reasons why auto top-offs are so popular. There are 4 ways to measure salinity. The first is a hydrometer, which very few people use in reefing because they're either a pain to use or inaccurate. Most reefers use a refractometer, where you just drop a few drops of water in a lens and look through it to find an accurate reading. For accuracy, most reefers recommend using a calibration solution like the one from Aquatic, which is a solution mixed at 35 parts per thousand. Just add a few drops and turn the calibration screw until it says 35 parts per thousand. We believe in calibrating enough to include it with all of our manual refractometers. If you don't own calibration solution, you can calibrate to 0 with RODI water, but it may be less accurate because you're calibrating the tool to a range way outside of what you're testing for. This is because a small calibration inaccuracy at 0 is likely to become a larger inaccuracy as you get closer to 35. There are also digital refractometers like the one from Milwaukee. For those of you that love digital readouts, this is the best bet. It's not cheap, but the moment that you hit that button and get an instant readout, you'll know it's money well spent. Outside of that, there's various salinity probes and aquarium controllers capable of measuring salinity. Well, these probes have come a long way in the last decade. They're still what I'd call a reference point, and good for a glance or letting you know when something's way out of whack. Things like microbubbles in the tank and other tank debris can collect on the probe when it's in continuous use, which can cause inaccurate measurements. So while it can be trusted to get you into the ballpark or let you know of a serious issue, I personally wouldn't use them to mix my salt water. The last of the life support critical options is pH, and to be honest, it barely made it. pH is a measurement of the acidity of the water, and generally between 7.8 and 8.3. Most reef tanks won't fall out of this range as long as you maintain proper alkalinity. The reason it made the critical list is because if it falls outside this range, there's a good chance there's something seriously wrong with your tank, and you need to start investigating. The test kits are pretty low cost and easy, so I'd probably suggest testing once a month just to stay in tune with the tank's overall chemistry. However, I think most reefers find a lot of value in owning a pH monitor like the Pinpoint or an aquarium controller like the Reef Keeper or Neptune Apex, which can not only display the pH but also set off various alarms if it falls outside that range, as well as turn off related equipment if needed. Typical to the Sally Furt line, the test kit's super easy to do and affordable. All you need to do is add your sample water to the test vial, 6 drops of the reagent, swirl for 10 seconds, and then look through the side at the color chart. Red Sea does something a little bit different with their pH test kit by packaging it with a more affordable version of their alkalinity test kit. Performing the pH test is almost identical. Add your sample water to the vial, 3 drops of the reagent, and swirl for 10 seconds, and then check the color against the color comparison chart. The second set of parameters we'll classify as important but requires infrequent testing because changes happen slowly over time and it's not likely to be a huge swing or major impact on the tank. These include nitrate, phosphate, magnesium, chlorine, chloramines, and I'm going to go way out on a limb here with ammonia. Nitrate is probably the most overlooked parameters in the reef tank. Low to mid-range levels promote algae and other pest organisms' growth. Higher levels can cause corals to brown out or even stress corals and fish, which make them susceptible to other issues. The correct nitrate level is up to some debate, but most reefers believe SPS tanks display the best color, closer to 0, but okay up to about 2 parts per million. Consensus is higher nitrate levels for LPS tanks are okay, but past 10 is probably too high, and over 20 parts per million means you should absolutely look at your feeding habits, water change schedule, or export methods like refugiums, carbon dosing, or something more advanced like a nitrate reactor. There's 3 popular nitrate test kits with the Salifert, Red Sea, and Niosh, all of which are somewhat different. Typical to Salifert, this test is pretty easy. Add your sample water to the vial, 4 drops of the liquid reagent, 1 scoopful of the powder reagent, swirl for 30 seconds, and then let stand for 3 minutes. Then looking from above, slide the sample vial back and forth until you identify the correct color. The Red Sea Nitrate Test Kit's a bit different, and it comes with a color comparison wheel, which allows it to be a bit more accurate in both the high and low range, and it also has a few more steps to the process. To perform the test, add sample water from the tank to both vials, and then add 5 drops of liquid reagent to one of them and swirl for 15 seconds. Then add 1 scoopful of reagent B and swirl for 60 seconds, and then 1 scoopful of C and swirl for 15 seconds. Wait 9 minutes and check the color comparison. Place your colored sample in the center hole and the clear blank on the outside hole and spin the wheel until they match. The Niosh Nitrate Kit is another one that I like a lot. To perform the test, you add sample water from your tank to both vials, and then add 5 drops of the liquid reagent to one, shake, and then add 1 scoop of the reagent powder and shake vigorously for 1 minute. When you're done, looking from above, slide both vials along the color comparison chart to identify the nitrate level in your tank. Well, this is a bit subjective. I have to say, of all 3 test kits, I personally find the Niosh the easiest to read because the color matches up so well. Phosphate is also the net result of feeding the tank, which not only promotes algae growth, but also slows down coral growth by inhibiting calcification. Pretty much anyone who monitors phosphate is looking to maintain levels below 0.03 parts per million. To be frank, without the help of a phosphate removal media like GFO or carbon dosing method like NO3PO4X, vodka, biopellets, or zeovit, you're likely going to have a hard time maintaining levels that low. If you're not attempting to maintain the suggested ultra-low levels, I'd probably take a close look at my feeding and water change schedules if my levels ever got much over 0.1 parts per million. I'd recommend checking phosphate levels when I do my general maintenance like water changes every 2 to 4 weeks. There are test kits for phosphate with the Salifert, Red Sea, and Niosh, but all of them can be somewhat hard to read. In this case, I really recommend the Hana Low-Range Phosphate Checker because nothing beats a digital readout. To perform the Salifert phosphate test kit, add your sample water to the sample vial, add 4 drops of the liquid reagent, swirl for 10 seconds, 1 scoopful of the powder reagent, and swirl for 30 seconds. Then reading from the top, match your sample against the color comparison chart. The Red Sea Phosphate Test Kit does come with a color comparison wheel, which does make it easier to read. To perform the test, add sample water from the tank to both vials, then add 10 drops of reagent A to one vial, swirl for 10 seconds, then 2 drops of reagent B, swirl for 10 seconds, add both vials to the color comparison wheel, and wait 6 minutes before reading. The Niosh Phosphate Test Kit is pretty similar to the Salifert in terms of procedure. One difference is it has 10 graduations between 0 and 1 part per million, which should increase accuracy. To perform the test, add your sample water from the tank to each jar. Add 10 drops of the liquid reagent to one of them and lightly swirl. After that, add 1 measuring spoon of the powder reagent, close the jar and shake for 15 seconds. Remove the lid after 10 minutes and take your measurement. This is where the Hana Checker comes in. While it's fairly easy to read the mid to high ranges on the phosphate test kits, it's almost impossible to read the graduations on the lower end near 0.03, where we're actually trying to keep the tank. It's not necessarily that the Hana Checker's procedure is more accurate, it's just the fact that we're removing the most inaccurate measurement tool from the equation, the human eye, and replacing it with a digital readout. To perform the test, fill both cuvettes to the 10 milliliter line, screw the cap on your blank and place it inside the checker, close the lid, put push the button to zero the machine. Then pour your reagent into the second vial, replace the cap, and shake gently for 2 minutes. Now remove the blank from the Hana Checker, insert your sample vial, and hold the button until the timer is displayed. In 3 minutes, you'll get a digital readout of your tank's phosphate level. Magnesium is another test that doesn't need to be performed all that often. Magnesium plays a critical role in maintaining calcium and alkalinity, but isn't depleted anywhere near as fast. The most common cause of magnesium depletion is actually water changes. Most of the common salt mixes are actually lower than ideal ranges. The common recommended range is about 1,300 to 1,350 parts per million. My suggestion is to test once a month or after larger water changes and then make adjustments if needed. Again, Salifert and Red Sea make the best options for testing these two elements. To perform the Salifert magnesium test, add some sample water from your tank into the test vial, 5 drops of the first liquid reagent and swirl gently for 30 seconds. Then add 1 spoonful of the powder reagent and swirl gently for 10 seconds. Then, just like the other Salifert titration-based test kits, draw in 1 milliliter of the reagent and slowly drip it in, swirling until you see a gray or blue color, whichever is observed first. Then, with the tip facing up, read the top of the plunger and compare against the table on your instructions. The Red Sea magnesium test kit's a bit more involved. You're going to first add your sample water to the vial, then add 1 drop of reagent A to the vial, swirl for 15 seconds, and then repeat that step for 5 times until you have 5 drops in there with 15 seconds of swirling between each. Then add 5 drops of reagent B and swirl for 60 seconds. Then draw 1 milliliter of reagent C into the syringe, place it in the titrator, screw on your test vial, and begin dropping in the reagent and swirling until it changes from red to purple. Then again, basically the opposite of the Salifert test kit. Rather than noting where the plunger ends, note the amount of titrant used, and then refer to the table on the instructions to find out the magnesium level of your tank. Both the Salifert and Red Sea test kits had very distinct color changes, which were super easy to read, so I'd personally use either one. The Salifert being the lowest cost and a bit easier to perform. The Red Sea has some distinct features like the titrator, and they also have reagent refill kits, which brings the long-term cost down. One of the parameters many reefers forget to test really isn't even inside the tank, but on their RODI system, which produces water for their tank. Most stores recommend replacing the carbon block some arbitrary figure like every 6 months, but that's no bearing on how much water you produce or the quality of your home's water. They could last as long as 2 years or as little as a couple of months based on your use. Best method of measuring the carbon block's overall performance at home is testing the chlorine or chloramine breakthrough. We recommend doing this once a month and only changing the blocks when they fail or get clogged. There are a variety of ways to test them, but I like to collect some water from the wastewater line, which is water that's passed through the carbon blocks but not the membrane. Let it run for 10 or so minutes and collect a sample. We feel strongly enough about this to include test strips with every RODI system we sell. Our 2 favorite methods of testing are these simple test strips from Lamont and a total chlorine checker from Hana. Total chlorine will read both chlorine and chloramines. Quick note, if you want to know if you have chloramines or chlorine in your city's water, you need a total and free chlorine test strip. If both total and free chlorine match, it means your city uses chlorine. If you get some total chlorine but near 0 free chlorine, it means your city used chloramines. If you don't want to bother figuring that out, the BRS Universal Carbon Block is ideal for both. The Lamont test strip's super affordable and probably the easiest test you'll ever perform. Just insert the test strip into your sample water for 2 seconds, pull it out, give it 1 quick shake, and then compare against a color comparison chart on the side of your container. Notice that the total chlorine came out at 3 parts per million, but the free chlorine was 0. That means our city uses chloramines, and at 3 parts per million, that's near the legal limit. This is probably a bit overkill, but you could also use a Hana Checker for total chlorine, which will give you more accurate results than a test strip. To perform the test, fill your cuvette up to the 10 milliliter line, screw on the cap, insert it into the checker, and push the button to zero it out. Then remove the cuvette, unscrew the cap, and pour the contents of one of the reagent packets into the cuvette, replace the cap, and slowly mix for 20 seconds. Then place the cuvette with the reacted sample inside the checker, close the lid, and push the button to get the total chlorine of your sample. The last and less frequent test is ammonia. Most reefers believe there's no need to test for ammonia after their tank is cycled, and that's probably true in most cases. However, I would keep an ammonia kit around to test anytime something takes a serious turn for the worse in the tank. Fact is, our bacterial filter is a very important component of maintaining a healthy reef tank, and there's all kinds of things that can impact the health of that bacterial filter. I'm not going to say ammonia is a cause, but when things go south, it often happens fast, so having a kit around to rule this out is pretty valuable. To perform the Salifert test, add your sample water from the tank to the vial, Fill the 1 milliliter syringe with reagent, add half of it to the test vial and swirl gently for 30 seconds, add the remaining half and swirl gently for 10 seconds, then allow it to stand for 3 minutes. To read the results, swirl the test vial gently for 5 seconds, and then hold the test vial in front of the color chart to compare. The Red Sea test kit has a couple more steps to it. Add your sample water to the vial, 1 scoop of reagent A powder, swirl for 10 seconds, add 5 drops of reagent B, swirl for 10 seconds, 5 drops of reagent C, swirl for 10 seconds, and then wait 15 minutes to take your reading. Then place the sample on the color comparison chart and view from the top to read. Between these two, I personally find the Red Sea the easiest to read and what I'd personally use. One of the reasons I included ammonia as important but requires infrequent testing is because there's new methods of testing for ammonia outside of test kits like the Senai monitor. Well, a typical aquarium controller is capable of monitoring all types of parameters in the reef tank. Most of them don't do ammonia. The Senai is capable of monitoring ammonia and notifying you if there's ever a spike, which gives you a fighting chance anytime something's damaging your bacterial filter or dying. Beyond that, there are a ton of other things to test for, which I personally classify as nice to know, but fewer reefers test for. The most popular are probably iodine, strontium, and potassium, followed by iron. If you dose elements like this, you should absolutely test for them. Salifert probably makes the best strontium kit, and Red Sea has a pretty awesome Colors Pro multi-kit, which includes iodine, potassium, and iron. Outside of that, some reefers monitor ORP with a probe and a monitor or controller, which in theory is a decent measurement of how clean your tank is and helps you control your ozone dose. Well, the claim that it measures tank cleanliness or dissolved organics in your tank is not completely accurate. It's a relative statement that's probably fairly accurate in most cases. Some test for carbon dioxide in their home's water with a kit from Lamont to ID issues with high DI resin consumption. A few reefers are concerned about silica in their water because it's possible high levels feed diatoms. However, other reefers intentionally dose it to feed other invertebrates. In either case, a test kit is needed to maintain the proper level. Salifert makes the only hobby-grade kit. Hawk makes a lab-grade version if you require that level of accuracy. That pretty much covers most of the things that we test for in our industry. Last week we asked all of you, how do you maintain trace elements? And water changes came out on top to a pretty convincing degree. This week we're asking all of you, how often do you think reefers should test for calcium and alkalinity? As always, I hope you picked up at least one new thing related to testing. If you did, give us a quick thumbs up and subscribe. See you next week with the week that you've been waiting for, week 35, soft corals and polyps.